Hey, it's Adam with Space Dodo, and I used ChatGPT for the first time. And I've seen all these videos where everybody's just like dumbstruck and they're just like, oh, it's gonna be a game changer. And I didn't ever think I was gonna make a ChatGPT video, and in fact, I had actually thought, I don't know, I was like reluctant to use it. Um, and I think there's reasons why. And one of those reasons was it's just everybody was talking about how game changing it was going to be, and it was just like I felt comfortable in the developer space I was in. I finally got to a point where I feel like I can do what I want to do when I want to do it. That never, you know what I mean. As a developer, I mean, like I can find a means to an end in a reasonable amount of time. Is what I mean. Not that I know how to do everything. That would never be the case. So it was just kind of psychologically unnerving thinking about ChatGPT as everybody's saying it's such a game changer. I felt already behind just because I hadn't tried out the demo yet. I was like, man, I must be already behind. And I know I'm coming at this as a general developer, but I think with ChatGPT, people aren't talking about what's really possible with this thing. Everybody's just kind of like, it's a game changer. Like, it feels like a person. It's very helpful. It like Google's for you very quickly. Like it writes papers for you. People are going to use this to cheat in high school. All sorts of things that are like, yeah, I get that. That's not interesting to me. These are kind of this like the of course ChatGPT is going to do that. And honestly, you write a really good string dictionary thing. You could already, like, there's been chatbots for 20 years. I remember talking to chatbots in middle school, AIM, and like you could do good string parsing stuff, and you can do a lot of clever tricks. And so I was just like, yeah, you get a big enough database and you do some string parsing, you can do some clever tricks. I didn't really realize what a real tool this was for developers, which is scary because this is, to me, I feel like developers have just been handed power tools for the first time. And if you look at the history of development, this to me is just as big, or if not bigger, than auto-compiling, which is, I feel like, was it Bill Gates, one of the people who helped build that, like something that would compile a program for you, when you could just write in instructions in a programming language, and these libraries would just auto-compile the logic for you. And they didn't have to be perfect, right? Humans can compile better than these things, but they can't compile faster. And in fact, when your code compiles, if you're not a coder watching this, all that means is like turning it into the actual ones and O's logical construction and order that a CPU will understand with memory. Turning it from like some sort of rigid, barely English code that a coder understands to something that a computer will actually be able to do something with. That's compiling. And man, This is as big as the autocompiler, because now, like just the amount of speeding up it does, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't ever have to be perfect. Just like an autocompiler is not perfect, right? It just has to be pretty darn good. And ChatGPT in its early stages is pretty darn good. And like I said, we've seen chatbots before and stuff, and I never thought I'd be doing a video that's like, hey, this is different. This is completely different. But this is different. This is very different. Let's talk about some things I've not been hearing people talk about, like what you can actually do with ChatGPT. It's in its early stages, but the thing that really changes the game is its context under awareness. It has a really, really, really good intuition of context. In a normal conversation with any kind of robot of any kind, you would say, oh, I hate those cars. right? And a person would be like, every time they see a PT Cruiser, they talk about how they hate them. And they would infer this context from perhaps years ago. Well, a robot would be like, which cars? I see 9 of them. Right? Or perhaps they were talking about a car referenced in a conversation. Would the AI know they were talking about a car that was referenced in a conversation and not a car that was around them if they were standing in a parking lot? These are things that ChatGPT could likely do very soon, because you can just tell it has a really good understanding of the context of the conversation, and it can iterate on the context. And we're just in the early stages of this. And why this matters, it changes everything, because now you can actually interface with this. I'm not just talking about how well, gosh, there's so much to talk about. Think about this. For, you want Iron Man's secretary Jarvis? It's almost there. Because Alexa does a lot of important things, right? Alexa does stuff where it can, and Google can schedule stuff on your calendar for you. It's got a digital calendar that keeps up with everything. Auto does your email invites. You can already automate a lot of email stuff. You can just voice talking with Alexa can look up stuff for you very quickly. With Siri, these things can schedule stuff and call, and they can do more and more things that an assistant can do. But one thing they couldn't do is understand context. So if you had been saying earlier, oof, I need to remember to schedule my kids' dentist appointments, and you said to your wife, you were like, hey, we should schedule those dentist appointments. You know what? The AI could hear you, understand the context, and say, I can schedule those dentist appointments. I see that you've got Tuesday and Wednesday open on your calendar. Do you want me to try for one of those days? You seem to like in the mornings. Do you want me to try to do one in the morning or in the afternoon? And then you tell it, call my dentist and try to do it in the morning. It already knows who your dentist is. It calls them and says, hey, I'm their assistant, and it can use voice. It can generate believable sounding inner talking, and it can understand when the person talks back to them. Have a full-fledged conversation, currently possible, right? I'm talking about using tools that already exist, plugging into something that's currently possible, having this full-fledged conversation and this context awareness. Now this thing has this conversation with a human being over the phone, scheduling a dentist appointment for you. This is as big as self-driving cars, because the thing about, like, we could automate travel, right? Because you would put it on rails, and you would get it on a train, and the train could go anywhere, and you could put a computer on that train way easier. And then so computers could start driving trains and stuff before they could start driving cars, because it's on rails. And so far we've had AI on rails, especially like with such a broad term. But I mean, really Siri and Alexa and Google have just had these AI on rails. They had certain things they could do and certain commands they understood. And as long as you were on the rails with it, it did what you wanted it to do. This context awareness can take this stuff off the rails. And that means, like, the same way like a Tesla can just drive the Dragon, which is like one of the most dangerous roads in America, and it can just drive it just fine. It can just do it. How can it do that? Because now it can auto context as it goes. It doesn't need the rails. It can interface with the road the way a human interfaces with the road. In fact, maybe even a little better in some regards. Think about this code-wise. So imagine a video game. ChatGPT, as far as I know currently, just has like text interface. But imagine that now we can do computer-to-computer interfacing API with ChatGPT, and you could do some, like, a version of it, right? You create a version of ChatGPT with some extra models it's trained on for your fantasy game, where you train it on all the lore and possible characters, and you give them all a backstory. A custom backstory. In fact, it can invent backstories and NPCs on the fly as well. So you could have infinite NPCs and backstories based off all your lore that you fed it. However you wanted to do it. Probably a little bit of both. A little bit of authored, a little bit of invented by ChatGPT. So this thing's powering, and now you got another layer on top of it. You got your lore, you got your own game database, you got your own like client databases and stuff where each game is having to keep track of its own session and its own context awareness for this and stuff. But once you get that layer in there, now essentially you're just saying, hey ChatGPT, pretend you're a character in my world and talk to me like you just had a long day at work. Then ChatGPT starts spitting out stuff about your lore, about the character, referencing backstory, referencing things you as the adventurer are saying. You can do this in VR. In fact, we just made a VR game the other day at my work, which uses the Oculus, what's it called? Vizims. And with the Vizims, we could just automatically make it look like you're talking. It was astounding. And this is early technology for this too, but it works. It works fine. And so we know AI voices are just, they're a dime a dozen now. So you got AI voices on top of auto-generated, context-aware backstories, really quick internet nowadays. To facilitate these conversations, you could literally have a Dark Souls game where the NPC could just talk to you in VR for forever. You're just playing your game. It's a VR version of Dark Souls, just imagining for your imagining's sake. And you see an NPC, and it has all this rich lore, and you're like, hey, can you tell me about that door over there? And it's like, knows what you're talking about. And it's like, yeah, I never go through that door. Last person who went through that door died. And you're like, oh, really? Why? And it just can talk to you. And then you're like, I don't like the color of your shoes. And it can go, I know that you changed the subject, and start talking about the color of its shoes. And you could just talk to that NPC all day long about important things, not important things, game things. You could get real deep conversations with it about the meaning of life. And it would just talk to you like it was living in that world. It could even reference that world's own made-up theologies, right? Like, it could do that. That's all feasible right now. Right now. I could think of a way to write this right now. Like, my way of doing it would be not very good, very jerry-rigged, and also involved a little bit of not good practices. But I can think of a way to do it right now. So I'm guaranteeing that the smarter people are actually doing this stuff. ChatGPT, for developers too, like I said, it's handing it power tools. Not only is it just generating content and stuff, it can also, and it be context aware for how it's helping you. As for developers, I've already been testing it, and a lot of times what we do, we don't remember every little thing to write or node to look up, or we don't remember every little thing that we do. We remember the way the logic structures and how these puzzles work. And so when you're coding, you don't always remember the command for this and the command for that. You create libraries and lookups. You remember a lot of the general stuff, and it's normal to just kind of Google how this thing looks and works, and what's the proper syntax, and normal to read documentation for the first time, and try to understand how this thing's telling you the syntax is supposed to work, and how these pass params really work, because it gives you weird case scenarios that change how the code looks, and doesn't always write them out for you. And then ChatGPT knows all this documentation and just kind of answers your questions, lays it out for you. It doesn't do perfect coding jobs, but ChatGPT can actually write snippets of code legibly, understandably, functionally, and quickly. Which means that the whole part of coding, this kind of documentation grinding, can now be automated. Essentially, you can have a part, like you can devote your brain more to the bigger puzzle and less of it to the where does the comma go kind of stuff, which this is already, this is like node-based programming in Unreal. One of the reasons I like that so much is because it's a little bit context aware based off what BP you're in and things like that, and what variables are local, and it just really speeds up the process. And as the compiler gets better, it's not even that slow compared to C++ anymore. And it just makes sense because you're, as a visual person, as people being visually aware and spatially aware, thinking of large code databases spatially is so much more helpful than thinking of it in long lines of text. Because I even think of, when I write traditional code, I think of it in text. I think of it in space. So all that being said, I didn't think I was going to do a ChatGPT video, but I just had to kind of turn the camera on and just kind of vent about the changes that are happening. We're literally, developers are now handed power tools. This is just as big as the compiler being generalized, where you don't have to manually compile all your code anymore. It's already changing things, and I wish I would have tried it a little sooner. But anyway, this is a place where we talk about game development. Obviously, general development can fall under that umbrella, and it did today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more stuff about game development in general, including like the fun side of it, the art side of it, all sides of it. We just like game development here on this channel. Thank you for watching. See you next time.